if you talk about it, it's marketing, it's advertising. It's not socially responsible to talk about the work that we're doing. I actually disagree with that. I'm not saying that we need to advertise and, start putting out television ads or go to town in terms of what we're doing. But I do believe we need to share. We need to talk about the work that we're doing. More importantly, we need to celebrate wins. There aren't so many wins because it takes a long time.
Hello and welcome to Corporate Social Impact Insights. I'm Siddharth Chatterjee from the AVP Academy team, and this is a series where we interview experts and leaders to learn about how we can amplify our contribution as practitioners in the corporate social impact space. The following is my conversation with Rama Iyer, Director General of the WPP India Foundation, who are doing some incredible work supporting the education and livelihood of young people in India. Rama has held roles in both the private and social sector and has an almost effortless ability to bring these worlds together in her impact work today. She's quick to admit, however, that this is not an easy ask, and it's fascinating to hear her sometimes radical perspective on what it means to bridge the gap between the corporate and social sector. Among other things, we discuss key approaches that the social sector can borrow from corporate organization and what it means to scale your corporate social impact internally by harnessing the power of your organization. We also discuss the education initiatives that WPP India Foundation supports, and it's interesting to learn that fun and engagement is a core criteria of the success of the initiatives. If I were measuring this episode on the criteria of fun, I'd say that it passes with flying colors. I learned a lot and really enjoyed this conversation with Rama, and I hope that you will too. Without further ado, let's join the conversation with Rama Iyer. Hi everyone, welcome to the Corporate Social Impact Insights podcast series. I'm very excited today to be speaking to Rama. Hi Rama, how are you today?
Good, hi. Actually, Sid, equally excited to be here. Thank you.
That's very kind of you, Rama. Would love to just get started by hearing from you a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
I'm a Director General at the WPP India Foundation, and WPP is the largest creative transformation company globally and in India. I have an advantage in the sense that I started with the WPP group as a management trainee in the advertising company of Ogilvy, and I've now sort of come back to run the foundation. So this is really, it's embarrassing to say I have more than 2 decades in the WPP group, but I think I'm almost a fossil out here.
Not at all. I don't think it's embarrassing at all. I think it's a matter of great pride and thrilled to be having a conversation with you because you have so much experience across the different dimensions of corporate and social, which brings us to the topic of this conversation, which is about bridging the gap between corporate and social sector perspectives. So just to give a little bit of background for that, I think as corporate social impact practitioners, we're often in that position where we are mediating between our internal team, the related corporate organization that we're affiliated to, and with the impact organizations that we are giving grants to. So we're actually always bridging the social sector and corporate perspective. That's not always an easy thing, as you must have experienced. No. Just in terms of your own experience at WPP Foundation, how has it been to communicate with both the internal corporate team and the social sector that you work with?
I think that's a great question. I think a couple of things which sort of come to mind. And if you really look at it, these are probably areas of potential tension or conflict between, the social sector and the private sector. I think for me, the first thing was in terms of how you define success metrics itself. If you look at it in the corporate space, it might be difficult to get there, but the metrics are something which are pretty much defined and everybody understands. So, is it top line sales, bottom line sales? Is it an equity measure? In the social sector, I remember at least in boardrooms and in meetings, when you look at it, how do you define success? And I know that's something that all of us in the social sector constantly struggle with. Right. That at what stage do you say a family has overcome poverty? At what stage do you say a woman has become an entrepreneur? At what stage do you say a child has been educated? So I think the first challenge is really in terms of how do you define the success measure itself? And I know that we all struggle with that. So I think one of the things that we did at the foundation is at the beginning itself worked a little differently in terms of saying that instead of measuring ourselves from the input, which is typically how I think the sector looks at most of the interventions. We sort of work very closely with a professor at Harvard who helped us define a theory of change where we very clearly have the outcomes already defined. And then we keep varying our inputs to see how quickly and efficiently can we get there. I don't think we've got
Right.
our theory of change 100% correct, but it's a starting point and we keep revisiting it. And at least we have something that we work towards and we measure ourselves with. If nothing else, we know where we've gone wrong, if not
Right.
right.
So it's kind of the way of moving from looking at the outcomes to focusing more on the input once you have your theory of change in place.
And I still believe, honestly, Sid, I do believe that however difficult it is, we should try and define the success measures. Otherwise, I think we all get so involved in our work that at some stage we get deeper and deeper. And which brings me to my second point, which is that very often, if you look at the model per se, it's a grant-based model, right? So till such time that you get the grants, the interventions or your programs are being implemented. I've seen so many programs that change focus or that lose priority because the donors' priority has changed or they're not able to continue to fund the project. And I think one of that brings me to my second point, saying that I think we do need to start looking at exit strategies. Similar to if you look at a sort of a corporate plan, there is a time when you need to break even. You do need to make profits beyond a certain point of time. If year on year you're making losses, then there are people asking you questions, right? So I think similarly in the social sector also, I see very few NGO proposals or civil society proposals that come in with clear exit plans or it comes in with a built-in exit strategy. And that's something that we are encouraging our partners to work with also. To give an example, in the foundation, for instance, we work with children all the way from the time that they're from education to livelihood. So we work with them for a period of 7 years. And one of the things that we've started doing is wherever our children who come out of our livelihood centers and are skilled in areas that we educate in, they come back as our trainers in the communities. Like our entire digital program really, but 70% of our trainers are really our children who've now become our trainers. And we're trying to now do that across some of the interventions. It's not possible across all the interventions, but we're trying hard to see how we can build that in. Could it be internal? Or do we need to look externally and start partnering with people who can help us create exit strategies? But at least that's something we're thinking about and we sort of worrying about. I don't think we have solutions to everything. But that I think would be a second area the social sector might want to think about. And as people who've been in the private sector and who now move to the social sector, this is something that we do look at or worry about. I think the third thing is just this headspace of, the time frame that it takes. In a typical boardroom, you are discussing results quarter on quarter. It's now, people are now looking at dashboards which are on a daily basis or real time. I remember my first board meeting, I was like, give me 7 years to show this kind of outcome. And everybody was like, 7 years? How does that work? So I think to break it down to bite-sized, so we do look at it not necessarily year on year, but we do have shorter milestones, which are more palatable, which are more sort of defined. And if nothing else, it allows all our stakeholders around us to believe that we're on the right track and so to continue funding the intervention for a long period of time. Otherwise, I find sometimes people suddenly get panicky saying, is it working? Is it not? Oh my God. And we need to sort of handhold them through that process.
No, I think it's very interesting because part of the idea is that there are these approaches which we're used to a lot more in the corporate sector, which is, keeping an eye on the outcomes, having an exit strategy in place, having a time frame, and usually quite a short time frame in which you evaluate whether the process is working. And in the social sector, when we don't want to borrow the framework absolutely as it is, right? It's very different because the outcome measuring impact is not the same, as you said, as measuring, the top line or bottom line revenue. The exit strategy won't be as simple and the time frame will probably be longer. And what you can show in each period may be quite different. So we're not always taking the wholesale approach, but we're just taking the frameworks and a way to make the process more efficient or learn the best things that we can from the corporate sector in a way as to also be able to communicate with corporate foundations, with our leadership better and take the best of it. But I think one of the challenges there is because you still have this push and pull aspect of it. You can't really meet, say, your corporate organization's board at the level of their commercial business. In the sense, the time frame is still going to be longer and impact in itself is quite complicated. So when you are trying to convince your leadership within the corporate organization to come closer to the social sector perspective, what has that been like for you?
I'd say firstly, try and be on the board yourself. It makes it a lot easier.
Right.
It
Right.
no, but on a more serious note, I think it did help because I was a part of the board. I do think having a seat at the leadership is important for many reasons. One is because it gives it the seriousness that it needs in an organization. I think it also sends out the right signals. One of the things that I find, particularly in India, is also because CSR, as you know, is a mandate for the country, and CSR is
Right.
2% of your profits. So I think the risk that we have is we end up being just a 2% conversation where the rest of the organization is pretty much 98% of the organization is business as usual. And so, in a lot of cases, we work in a silo. We pretty much are independent of what's happening in the rest of the organization. And very often are so passionate and so involved about the work that we do that it's not democratized. It's not something that the rest of the organization either understands or is even able to participate. So, to
Right.
that extent, I think scaling internally becomes a huge challenge. There's only so much you can do, with a team of 5 or 7 or 8 people. So I think one of the things that I sort of feel quite strongly about is that we will always be a core function, just like any other specialized function is. But I always look for ways to integrate it back with the larger organization. And I've seen a lot of advantages in that. For one, of course, I think the fact that I was part of the industry, and so I love the business. I genuinely enjoy the creative process. I find that quite seamless, and I think I'm quite lucky to have that advantage of really enjoying the core business. But there are lots of advantages. I have a really lean team of 5 people. I
Right.
don't worry about administration. I don't worry about finance. I don't worry about HR because I use the group's resources. As a
Right.
result of which, my team has the advantage of getting some of the best medical insurance benefits, which I couldn't have got if I had a team of 5 people. From a social point of view, we're part of this campus where there are 3,000 of us who are housed out here. Otherwise, I would have to take the responsibility of managing all of that, and I could never do it with such a small team. In addition to that, I think being part of the leadership team, I have visibility of what the rest of the organization is doing. It's much easier to connect dots, to pull in resources, to be part of some of the larger conversations they're doing. We're at a stage where we have proof of concept and we look at scaling. And I think one of the biggest advantages the group has is we have pretty much very, very deep relationships with almost the top 100 marketeers and spenders in the country and globally.
Right.
Instead of me trying to make those calls and try to connect those dots, I just have to reach out to the client leads who are able to initiate those conversations for me and get me in at a time that is relevant and in a way that it's relevant rather than cold calling and looking for business leads, etc. So I actually see a huge advantage in
Right.
sort of being part of a larger network.
There's so many interesting points in what you just said. And I think the idea, and we spoke about this briefly, and you put it so well, which is how do you take the 2% conversation and make it part of the rest of the 98% of the
Yeah.
organization? And I think within what you were saying is that idea of being open to integrating and getting the organization involved in your work. So when you spoke about, using the resources of the greater organization, for a lot of people, that's such a big mindset shift to actually be willing to integrate within the larger organization. Because especially when we think about the 2%, the impact mandated part of the corporate organization, maybe it's a corporate foundation in itself, we always think of it as very separate from the commercial parts of the business. And, we're chasing impact, it's different from profit. But actually having that openness to integrate, that's a huge mindset shift. And of course, I think that has more benefits coming the other way, in the sense that the organization becomes more involved in the impact and they start to take more of a stake into it. But could you just go into a little bit more about that idea of scaling internally that you were talking about? What does that actually mean?
In fact, I think, Sid, we're in a dangerous position, but I think the team first looks at saying, okay, who in the organization can do my job? If nobody can do it, then I'll do it. So
Right.
I think we're pretty much going the other way. But WPP as a group, so we're a market leader globally and in India, right? So I don't think doing things in a small silo, sort of impacting 100 homes is something that is in our DNA at all. I think we understand mass level behavior
Right.
change. We understand being a catalyst and being an enabler and bringing about mass level change. So I think the team and me, we are sort of always looking to see what could be some of those pivots which will get people interested, excited, and want to be part of this movement. So the pressure on us having to do that with each stakeholder becomes that much lesser. Like, to give an
Right.
example, we had a CEO meeting yesterday, and I actually talked about the foundation and asked group companies who would want to partner with us in which aspect of it. We literally put out all the projects. And I have some digital teams who've come forward saying that they would like to partner us in our digital literacy, including helping us build an app. One of our PR companies is very comfortable to look at how they can amplify it among the stakeholders. We have our creative companies who come in and they want to sort of see how they can use social media to start talking about our stories of change. So suddenly, I walk out of the meeting and I have 4 CEOs who are now saying, okay, fine, can I help you do this? And for me, they're the best in the business. Even if I try to do all those roles myself, I would never be able to do it as well as they could. The second thing is it would take away from the core function that I want my team to do, which is to really be engaged in the communities that we work in and the beneficiaries. But at the same time, we do want to amplify our work. We do want to get in larger partners. We do want to look at digital, the work that we do, and look at how we can sort of scale it disproportionately. So these are needs that we have because we're at a stage where we want to scale our program. I would prefer to invest my time in finding the best partners who can help us do that job and tell that story better than try and do it all myself. Because then it takes away from what my team is skilled at. And I really believe that there are people who are fantastic at their job and like we are really good at what we do. I don't expect them to come and do our work. But I do
Right.
believe that it works for them and for us to sort of, in the interest of the communities that we work in, to partner and to sort of make it much bigger and to make it far more evocative than we can on our own. And the second thing is, we've also realized with the Gen Z or the Gen X, I'm forgetting now, they seem to get younger by the day. But there's a lot of energy, and especially after the pandemic, we find that the average age in our offices is 27 and 28, right? We
Right.
find that a lot of the younger members want to engage with organizations that are socially relevant. They want to be part of something that goes beyond just coming into work. They want to be part of creating a certain change. They want to, be part of giving back. And instead of each of them looking for these opportunities outside, what
Right.
we do is we look at how can we channelize all that energy towards the communities that we work in and make this in a way that they feel good about it. And our kids love interacting with different people who come in and meet with them. It gives them a lot of reality check. This is literally inclusion put to work rather than just being in a
Right.
PowerPoint slide. And I think that's some of the things that we're seeing. How do we get more of our kids into our offices, into our campuses, into our lives? And how do we sort of be a lot more integral part of them and their families and their lives? So it sort of seems to be heading in the right direction for now.
Rama, you make it sound very simple, but I feel like it's such a
Then
radical.
let me rewind. No, it's not.
It is such a radical kind of mindset shift because often when we think about corporate impact, often there are these kind of two divergent almost strands. There's that employee engagement aspect, then there's
Yes.
the grant making or whatever
Yeah.
impact work you're involved in. And even though logically it does sound like those two should go together, in practice, often we do these almost out of compliance, and it's hard to know how to get
Yeah.
employees actually involved. And a lot of the challenge is actually opening up in a sense. And as you'd put it in our conversation before, how comfortable are you in being integrated with the success of the organization? So
Yeah.
being willing to
Yeah.
actually see yourself as a part of a larger corporate organization where there are these different functions. And though I think the way you speak about it as a market leader and the different skills that are already present within your group, and that actually employees across different functions are interested and very capable, in many cases, much more capable of delivering certain
Yeah.
parts than the
Yeah.
impact team, the lean
Yeah.
impact team is able to. So actually, part of it is you also opening up to allow other people to contribute in whatever way they can, to contribute their own ideas. And often that means giving up of control or sort of integrating within the organization's culture a little more. Does that resonate with your experience? Or?
So yes, I agree. So I think it is a little scary at times to say how much do I let someone else in. And I'm not saying that I'm holier than thou and oh, I don't care. I've been in the corporate space. So I have seen that when we were just a small team of 4 or 5 of us, we were able to just operate within a limited geography, and I was struggling to scale beyond that. The only way I could have scaled is if the team grew to say 50, 80, 100, in which case you end up just managing people. And I really felt that it made so much sense when we have about 30,000 employees in India itself, and I have so many people who want to contribute. So
Right.
why not? And frankly, it makes my P&L look so good because I'm still working with a team of 5 people, and I actually
Right.
have an extended team. I look at them as an extended team who I just pull in the resources when I want, and I don't have to worry about their performance growth and their HR, etc. I mean, I pull them in when we want. We work on a project, and then I go back to pulling in somebody else who's needed for that particular moment. The other thing is there's so many resources that I don't think I can employ 24/7, 365 days of the year, because I have some
Right.
really senior people who sort of volunteer. I mean, half the time it's the CEOs of the companies who are volunteering their resources and their time. So I don't think I can employ those kind of people, but I get the advantage of working with them at the time that I need them. So for me, what really works is I think we have to move social conversations to the board level.
Right.
And I do believe that change starts at the top. And I think we should make sure that whatever it's called in your organization, whether it's called CSR or whether it's called, I know there are lots of words, CSR, there's sustainability, there's purpose, there's ESG, and there's social impact. So I think whatever function you're driving, or at least this is how I would look at it. If I was driving a function, then I won't want that function to be part of the boardroom conversation. I would want it to be part
Exactly.
of leadership conversations. So for instance, on the WPP leadership team, I do sit as part of the leadership team as well, which allows me to integrate what we are doing into what the group is doing at a pretty senior level. Also, I think when people see the change at the top, that sort of starts coming alive through the entire organization as well. The other thing that I find, sit in the sector, I find that we're very coy about the work that we do. There's always this fine line saying that, if you talk about it, it's marketing, it's advertising, it's not socially responsible to talk about the work that we're doing. I actually disagree with that. I'm not saying that we need to advertise and start putting out television ads or go to town in terms of what we're doing, but I do believe we need to share, we need to talk about the work that we're doing. More importantly, we need to celebrate wins. There aren't so many wins because it takes a long time. Even the people who are working along with you and your immediate teams and your immediate stakeholders need to believe that you're on the right track, that, I think everybody needs a pat on their back. And
Right.
I think that's what keeps the motivation going. That's what keeps, because our work is really difficult. I think it's so
Right.
much tougher than the work that happens in the corporate sector. And so what is wrong if you get certain recognition for the work that you're doing? What's wrong if you get acknowledged for having done good work? Our kids love it. I mean, every time there's a forum, whether it's within the country or even outside or in our offices, you should see the way our kids want to be on stage. I mean, we just had this inter-school Tinkathon event and we invited the entire senior creative teams. We opened it out to everybody. The kids just loved interacting with all of them. They were showing off so much about the work that they did. And now they want to come into our offices and we're going to have them come in. I think it's fantastic because otherwise, it's just something which sits in a PowerPoint presentation. I don't think people really understand unless they go into communities and unless they meet the people that we are working with. So to sort of cut that short, I think we should celebrate our wins. I think we should stop being coy about it. I think we should talk more about it, both what works and what doesn't work. I think it's high time we learned off each other. And actually, AVP, and I do believe that you all are doing a fantastic job of it. And I'm going to urge you to find ways where we can socialize what we're doing among the CEOs and among the leadership team and
Right.
sort of more of a C-suite. It needs to become a conversation at that level
Right.
so that it's seen as the right thing to do and it sort of legitimizes a lot of the work that we do.
And I do want to go back to talking a little bit about the kids and the initiative specifically that you were talking about. But really quickly to get back to that point, you've had the perspective of actually being on the board and knowing what the boardroom conversation is. And for maybe corporate practitioners who don't get that access or perspective, I think it's important to recognize that actually boards are rightly concerned about the ways that they can be impactful. The conversation is going to happen regardless of whether or not you participate in it. Partly because it's a compliance thing, but also because we want our work to be impactful, regardless of what the work is being done. And so despite how busy your board is or how many things they have on their mind, there's always going to be time to have this conversation. And people will find their personal time, and the more they're personally involved, the better it is for the leadership. Even they get a lot out of being involved in the impact and understanding the impact that you're doing. So because the conversations are happening, should feel comfortable to be vocal about the work that you're doing, both the successes and the failures of the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's a really great point, Rama. But could you also tell us a little bit about the kids that you were mentioning? So a little bit about that initiative specifically.
I can go on. How much time do you have? No, but no. So very quickly, so the work that we do, like I mentioned, I think we decided as a group to intervene where we felt we would have maximum impact. And so, which is why we chose the space of education, because I think there's a lot of data which says that when you educate a child, how it not only changes the child's life, but also goes on to changing the entire family's life, right? So,
Right.
so I think that was a no-brainer. We have more than 50 group companies. So I think to align all the group companies along a common vision and a common social agenda itself can be difficult. But education was one of those absolute unifiers. So I think that's the space that we chose to look at. Also, if you look at in India specifically, the state, for many reasons, does not take care of basic social security, things like basic healthcare and basic education beyond a certain point. So I think we've all grown up to be in ways where we take care of ecosystem. So the help that's working in your house, if your child is getting married, it just goes into saying that you would step in and you would help, etc. Right? So education is something that everybody at some level has been involved in, either with their own kids or they have help at home, helping them out. It was a great unifier. Digital literacy is something that we look at very specifically. And I think the pandemic has just upped the ante on that. So our kids learn coding, they learn 3D, they learn robotics, they're doing AI, they're now doing tinkering.
That's really amazing.
Yeah. And of course, they learn music, dance, a lot of social issues in terms of, self-esteem, goal setting, gender, in addition to hardcore education outcomes as well. But I think the underlying thing for us across all the work is we want to bring the joy of learning back. So literally move from classrooms to joy rooms. I think that's what we keep telling ourselves. So the underpinning on everything is whatever we put in has to be fun. So if it doesn't clear an index of more than 80 to 85% on enjoyment, then we know our program is not what is right for our kids.
That's such an excellent metric. And I think more schools should also look into adopting that in the education system. That's really spectacular to hear that. Another thing that I did was very curious to ask you about, which you mentioned offhand, is the experiments and failures budget at WPP Foundation. Could you explain that a little bit?
So fundamentally, we're an ideas company, right? And I think we do know that not all ideas work. But if you put that filter of saying it has to work, then some of the best or the biggest ideas never really come forward. So I think that one of the biggest things that we look at is to say that let's have the license to dream big and let's have the license to test and to figure out whether it works or not. So I think we're one of the foundations who I think lucky to have a budget where I've set aside to test and to look at innovations with a clear understanding that some of it will not work. And so it is in many ways a conversation that we have with the board upfront, saying that these are some of the things that we're going to test. It's not like we test without having measures in place, but despite having all that, we know it won't work. It may not work, rather. So I think we do set aside a certain percentage in our budget, which is literally a sort of a testing new projects with the full understanding that it might fail. And I must say that the board is extremely supportive of saying that unless we have that freedom to do that, we will never really come up with path-breaking ideas. Or, for instance, we're actually building this app with IIT and with Tara Trust, which is an app for English reading assessment. We've piloted it, it's worked really well. If we're able to scale this, technically any child or anybody who wants to learn English and can sit in their house and teach themselves. And in my mind, we would have changed the way people speak and learn English dramatically. If that works, we can move it into Hindi, we can move it into practically any language. If I didn't have the leeway of testing, we would have never gone ahead and built an app.
That's fascinating because in some ways it has the potential to be so radically transformative, but that also means that we're not sure if it'll work. So actually having the space to do that, and it's really nice to see how the culture of the organization in that sense, being inclusive, being, as you said, an ideas company or someone who's always been a market leader to test things, how you've been able to integrate that into the impact as well. And I think that's what allows, in one sense, the leadership to be so involved and the employees in the team to be involved in the impact initiatives, that it reflects in some ways the best values of the company.
In fact, we tell partners that we work with SIT that if there are any ideas which you all really believe in strongly and no company is willing to fund it because it's too risky, bring it to us. I mean, we would love to test it with you.
That's incredible.
Because I actually think that there has to be room to think differently and there has to be room to think big. And not all of it will work. And I don't think we should be penalized for trying.
Yeah, I'm sure this is music to the ears of lots of non-profit leaders listening to this. Yeah. So Rama, as we're coming towards the close of this, is there anything that you wanted to go into, maybe a piece of advice or some last words on how do you bridge the gap between social sector and the corporate sector?
No, I don't think I give advice. I don't think I'm the right person for any advice, but I can talk about what worked for me. Couple of things. One is, I think we should take the effort to understand what the core business is for the organization you're part of. I think it's a win-win for everybody in doing that. The other thing what worked for me is, I think I've been trained from the beginning. So before I moved out of communication, I was heading strategic planning across Asia Pacific for the Unilever business. So I think what I was trained to do in corporate life was to look for synergies across geographies and across audiences to see what could be used as triggers for communication, for behavior change. And I think my mindset is to look for unifiers rather than to look for differentiators. Sometimes I think we walk into a situation saying, this is what I want to do and this is my turf and I need to protect it. It might help to look at it in terms of saying, what is it that we can do together? And start with some of the unifiers. I find that some of the detractors or some of the differentiators then find ways to get resolved. It becomes easier to have those conversations if you first have unifiers. And I'm not saying that everybody is going to agree on everything, but it might help to start looking for unifiers. I find the differentiators are easier to handle after that. The third thing I would really say is that you need to have a champion at the board level, at seniorship positions. And I think whoever's driving the social initiative should find ways to integrate themselves into part of the larger leadership, part of the larger conversation. Like I said, move out of the 2% into the 98%, because we need to start making the work that we do more integral to the organization rather than peripheral, which is where I think in some cases it
Right.
is.
That's extraordinary. I think there's so much more to talk about. This conversation could go on and on, but we're so thrilled to hear from you. And it's really incredible also to hear with the enthusiasm with which you speak about your impact initiatives, but also your organization and all the work that you do. I'm definitely very interested in, finding out more and digging into the initiatives that you're doing and finding out how the experiments and failures budget comes along. This has been a really, really interesting conversation for me. So thank you so much, Rama, for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so much fun, Sid. Thank you.
Corporate Social Impact Insights is part of the AVPN Academy Corporate Social Impact Center, which was established in partnership with Johnson & Johnson, Miller Trust, and Visa. The center also includes self-paced modules, a library of content, and learning circles, which are a monthly series of small group discussions for corporate practitioners. Learn more at academy.avpn.asia. This is a monthly podcast series, and we hope you will tune in for another episode soon. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.